This is one of my favorite experiments to test students especially, but people in general, about out-of-box thinking. Okay, everybody talks about, oh, it's out of the box, we have to think outside the box, outside the box, outside the box. Well, if you look at this diagram on this board here, you'll see what looks like a target with a bullseye. And you've got data points, you've got dots, blue dots, all centered in the middle versus ones off to the side. And I would ask the simplest question possible to the students, which is more interesting? Which is more interesting? And I ask this question all the time. And a lot of students would say, well, you know, some students would argue that, no, we think the points at the center are interesting because it looks like someone's got is very highly accurate. And so obviously they have some preconceived notion as to what it is they're looking at. Okay? And then other people will say, well, I think it's interesting that they're off to the bottom and away from the bullseye. Why? Well, because clearly there must be something wrong. I mean, if I'm throwing darts, which is what this kind of looks like, or shooting targets, I've obviously got an issue with either my hand or the gun I'm using, right? So it tells you that something in the experiment is different, right? And that's interesting. So in a purest sense, if I saw this diagram, I would always point to this and say, this is interesting. This is probably what they're aiming at. But the key to the story is, I've made horrible assumptions. And that's what inside the box thinking is. The assumption is that this target, this line here, is drawing my eyes to the center point with these circles going concentrically going outward.
Try this puzzle. This is often given to students in MBA classes to test their wits, to make them think outside the box.
But what if I took away all those preconceived notions? As you see here on the whiteboard, you have two sets of dots. Now I ask the same question again. Which is more interesting? Would it matter if I did it this way? No, wouldn't matter at all, would it? So you can't answer that question. Why? Because you no longer have the box around the problem. The problem, there is no box. So when I say out of the box thinking, I'm not saying out of the box thinking, I'm saying there is no box. There is no box. When I do astronomy, there is no box. I see data points here, I see data points there. I think both are interesting. I have to study each to understand why there's slight differences. Is this positional? Is this through velocity? Whatever the hell it is. And more importantly, in astronomy, I have very little knowledge. All of those lines, and I'll put them back on, all of those lines they represent assumptions. They represent the physics that we understand when we take these observations. And they represent our present knowledge. So the box you're in is your present knowledge. When you're studying things that we really don't know what they are, the box you're in tends to bias you towards here. And so you would say, yes, that proves my theory or my model is correct. My assumption is correct. And yet we have a data set down here that does not prove that. And then you have to argue against that. So most of science is, I use my preconceived notions of the science itself, my modeling, whatever, and I find data sets that tend to match it, confirm, and then there are other data sets that don't confirm. And what I will spend my life doing, and I don't, but most people do, is trying to convince me that this is actually that. In other words, it's just translated. So there's a fundamental issue in the data set rather than the model. Or the model has to be adjusted slightly to explain that. Well, if you adjust the model to explain that, it doesn't explain this. So what I'm trying to say is, everybody talks about outside the box thinking and all this stuff. There is no box. The box is your preconceived assumptions. And if you can't get away from preconceived assumptions, or preconceived notions, assumptions of what you're doing and your preconceived notions, you will not fully be able to appreciate the differences in these two data sets, or if there's any differences at all for that matter. So, and that's really what it's all about. And if you want to get to the next level of understanding of a problem, you've got to first not assume anything. Just observe. Just observe. Just observe. Just look. See what you look at. And look at the pretty pictures even. You know, you take a picture of the sky, that's really cool. And then just stare at it for long periods of time and just observe and enjoy it. You know, appreciate it as a form of art even. And when you get to that level, in science especially, you're looking at the brushstrokes rather than the numbers. You're starting to understand that although we have a basic understanding of the universe around us, there really is limitations to that understanding. And so what we first do is appreciate the brushstrokes of life, of the universe above our head. Okay, we first appreciate that, the beauty of it. And then we start trying to infer things from it, including our existing present theories and stuff like that. But we do it backwards. And we do it backwards for a simple reason. It's the scientific method. We're told we have to make a proposal based on a hypothesis. And of course that makes sense. Really what you want to do is you just want to look at the sky. You just want to look up. You just want to look up and say, that's amazing. Look at that. And you got this massive telescope that's worth, $1 billion. Who's going to let you do that? Are you freaking mad? It ain't happening. But it's what we should be doing. It's what we should be doing. So we need to redesign our telescope so we can do that rather than have preconceived notions. We want to see the entire sky all the time at all transitions. And then we can just look at it and marvel. And then afterwards we can start disseminating pieces of knowledge from it. And that influences how we design telescopes. So when I think of out-of-box thinking, I keep telling people, there is no box. Your box is your preconceived notion of things. Stop that.
Rather use something like creative thinking or anything but this cliche. It is the worst in consulting.